Okay, great. My name is Joseph. Welcome to the Sunday sit of the Monastic Academy, which is a modern monastic training program in Lowell, about an hour and a half northeast of here. And today we'll be doing a talk of about half an hour, and then a guided meditation, and then we'll have a discussion, all of us, and then we can have some time to socialize, and we'll finish it with some chanting. Can I ask, just to tailor the talk, how much experience you guys have with either meditation or with Buddhism or?
I haven't been doing a regular meditation practice lately, but I have done it at other times in my life.
Okay.
And I'm familiar with Buddhism in terms of the history of the religion and what have you. Never been practicing Buddhism.
Awesome. Cool. If there are any questions, then feel free to raise your hand and ask and clarify. And if I'm going too fast, and tell me, and really feel free to ask whatever. And just a quick note, there's usually a much higher turnout. The reason it's so intimate is there is a celebration at the center, at the Monastic Academy today, for a new meditation hall that has been recently built and is now being celebrated. So that's where the head teacher, Soryu, is, and that's where the rest of the residents and apprentices are. So I'm the representative this evening. And this talk is I think the fourth in a series of talks on the subject of gurus and trust. So spiritual teachers and the concept of trust in general. I, of course, am not a teacher. I'm just a guy who really likes meditation and Buddhism. This talk will be limited to the very limited scope of my personal experience. So I'll try not to go very high with this, but I'll try to come from what matters to me. And the fact that I'm here giving the talk in this series is somewhat ironic. When I first got to the Monastic Academy, this was maybe almost 2 months ago, as is customary, I had tea with Soryu, a sort of welcome tea to get to know each other a little bit. And it started out with a little bit of chit-chat of where are you from, what do you do, and he then asked me if I had anything else to say, and I more or less said, well, I'm rather cynical and suspicious by nature, and this whole dynamic of like you as head teacher in a somewhat guru-y role, and us as the students, and this sort of sense of hierarchy makes me deeply uncomfortable. And he sort of laughed and said, okay. And a few weeks later, this series of talks began. So I'm not claiming any sort of causal link to this series, but there is certainly strong correlation. And it's just funny, it's ironic that here I am giving a talk on gurus when I myself have it because of my conditioning, it is something that contracts me. And in my realization, in my understanding that I'm not a teacher, that there is very little I can actually come and outright say about this topic, but I have lots of questions, and I'd like to share that kind of questioning with you guys, and maybe the sense of urgency in these questions. And it sort of a broad existential nature of questioning. And if you can try to think back maybe to childhood, to And I don't think this happened at one moment, but maybe a series of moments where, you know, you all know that moment when you see babies looking at their hands for the first time, and they're kind of like seeing these things here, and they probably don't really realize that they're theirs, but there's like this slowly dawning realization over time that, okay, I'm this person in this body, and this is what's happening now, right? So, something like that happens at some point. And we kind of take it for granted for a long time. I feel like that's how it was for me, because people tell you like, oh, this makes sense. Like, this is what's happening. This is life, and it's fine, and there are rules, and it's important for you to do your homework, and vegetables are good for you, and you believe some of it, and you don't believe the rest of it, or you know, as development progresses, it changes, but I think most of us hit that point where we're like, but why am I this person in this body? Like, what's going on here? That sense of oh man, like what is this? Can you taste that? Can you taste that? Like, what is going on here? And even now, what's going on here? Like, if you can break the stream that you have of story and memory that led you here, and be just for a second really present only with what you have here in your current sensory experience. Is there anything here right now that you really know? You have images, you have sounds, and if you ask yourself the question, who am I and what am I doing here? I invite you to try that for a second. How could you answer that question? I'm actually asking. How could you answer that question? Who am I and what am I doing here?
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is trying to stay alive, right? Trying to live and stay alive. In terms of, and who am I? That's a good one. You know, I'm part my mom, part my dad, but it's, you know, however this body came together, that's who I am, right? And so that's one way of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And even that is, you know, you have that, so that you were sitting here and that idea came into your head, and from a Buddhist perspective, or from some elements of Buddhist psychology, or then you would say that even that idea can be broken down into just moment-to-moment sensory experience, right? You had the words of that idea maybe playing as audio in your thought, and maybe you had images of your mom and dad, visual images going through your thought space. So there's this moment-to-moment sensory experience, and that's kind of all you have to go on, right? And even if you say like, oh, I know that, well, that knowledge also is just a combination of whatever feeling in your chest, of whatever that feeling is of like, oh, that feels right, plus that combination of words, plus that combination of images. And that's all we have at any given time. And in my experience, that's not always accurate. And I mean, over and over and over, the more I pay attention to the ideas that I have and the knowledge that I think I have the experience over and over and over that it's just wrong. And this happened to me. Jeffrey and I were talking about the retreat that we just had at Monastic Academy last week. And after the retreat ended, and I knew I wanted to prepare this talk, I went to the bookshelf in the main room, and the bookshelf is covered during the retreat, usually with a blanket, so that no one is tempted to just kind of like chill out in front of the bookshelf and maybe read a little bit, so it reduces temptations. And this time, instead of using a sheet, someone had just laid a thin sheet of wood over the front of the bookshelf. So I came to the bookshelf to take off the sheet of wood to get the book that I wanted to research for this talk. And I noticed that someone has actually screwed in the sheet of wood to the shelf, to the front of the shelf. And so I, of course, start thinking like, oh man, now I have to get a screwdriver to take this screw out, and why'd they use so many screws, and well, that's going to mess up the wood of the bookshelf, and it was a nice bookshelf, why'd they do this? And it took me really, I think, at least 2 minutes to realize that no one drilled into the bookshelf to fasten this sheet of wood to cover the books. They had just turned the bookshelf around. And I had just been looking at the back of the bookshelf, you know. But I had been, it didn't even occur to me. It was so obvious to me, just my own sensory experience and cognition that, oh, someone, you know, this is what happened. This is the front of the bookshelf, and the more you pay attention, the more you notice these moments where, well, can you really trust your sensory experience? Can you really trust that thing inside that says, oh, I know this. This is knowledge that I have. This is true. In my experience, less and less. The more you pay attention, the less you can trust that. So I ask again, what can we trust? You know, what do we trust? How do we live our lives? Based on what? What do we worship in the end? And I don't think it's possible not to trust or not to worship. I think in the end, everyone is worshiping something. Everyone is trusting something, be it the American dream or capitalism or one of the many theistic religions or Buddhism or Hinduism or materialism or even nihilism, even to say, well, there is no meaning and I don't trust anything. Well, that's a decision, that's a choice you make to trust a certain idea that, you know, and you could be wrong. Maybe there is meaning and like you're really screwing it up by choosing to live in that way. I don't see a way to not make a choice to trust something. But how do you make that first step? And the image that always sits with me is of being in this void, floating in this void of space. And directionless, timeless void. And that's the human condition. And every once in a while, you may see a stepping stone, and maybe even a few in a row, that a path leading somewhere. And that could be one of the things I mentioned. It could be a religion, it could be a teacher, it could be love, romantic love. It could be one of various things that we choose to trust. And we could say, okay, this is the path that I'm going to take. But as we take our first step from in the void onto that stepping stone, and our foot is going forward to land on that first stepping stone, what is our back foot standing on? It's still standing on void, right? From what ground are we taking that first step? There's always going to be some choice, some action of responsibility, some leap of faith to that first stepping stone. And to bring in the guru aspect of this talk, the promise of the guru is that there is someone who has seen more than you have, experienced more than you have, understood more than you have about navigating this void, about navigating whatever it is that's going on here. And there's something incredibly tantalizing about about the ability to place our faith into someone's hands and say, with you I'm walking. This is where I'm gonna put my trust. And of course, the obvious catch-22 here is that first step. There are many gurus, from many different traditions with many different leanings and directions, and not all of them are trustworthy. Not all of them can be trusted. I mean, and we hear stories every once in a while of gurus who betray the trust of those who follow them. And we're left again with the problem of that first step. How do we take that first step? In the Pali Canon, in the relatively original scriptures of Buddhism, there's a sutta called the Kalama Sutta, which tells the story of the Buddha traveling with his entourage, coming to a group of people called the Kalamas, and they have heard great things about him, that he has these levels of attainment and understanding and this ability to teach and explain and guide, and they say, hey man, it's awesome that you came, but listen, this is like super inaccurately paraphrased, I'm just gonna say. Listen, we have these gurus coming through all the time, and one will come through and will say, like, hey, like, this is what's going on, this is what you need to do, and this is how you do it, and all these other gurus are wrong. And we're like, okay, that was interesting, and he leaves, and another guru comes in, and he contradicts the first one, and he says, no, it's not what these other gurus say, it's this and this and this, and you do it like this in order to this. And he leaves, and a third comes, and so on. And they turn to the Buddha and they're like, listen, Siddhartha, man, like, what's the deal? We're confused. All these gurus are contradicting, and you're coming and you're going to say something else. And the Buddha answers. He says, of course you are uncertain, Kalamas. Of course you are in doubt. When there are reasons for doubt, uncertainty is born. So in this case, Kalamas, don't go by reports, not by legends, not by traditions, not by scripture, not by logical conjecture, not by inference, not by analogies, not by agreement through pondering views, not by probability, or not by the thought. This contemplative is our teacher. So he right there wiped out pretty much everything I ever go by, right? Which is reports, by previous knowledge from other people, by my own logical conjecture and inference, by comparing different views I could possibly have, by thinking of what is most likely, or even by saying like, well, this is my teacher and I'm going to trust him. And it's worth saying that this sutta it's not really directly about gurus. It's more about a guru's teaching. But I think it still speaks to the same point of how to know what to trust. So what does the Buddha offer instead? He says, well, take greed. Take this thing, greed. And if this guy, overcome by greed, acts in such a way as to harm or kill living beings and to take the lives of others and to do all this mischief, what will come of that? Is that going to lead to suffering? And the Kalamas answer, yes, of course. And the Buddha says, good, drop that. And he moves on. And he does the same with aversion and with delusion. And then alternately he says, how about someone who is not overcome with greed and goes around and is acting? Will he bring suffering? And they say basically no. And the sutra continues, but I think this is enough to illustrate his point, which is don't trust anything. Try it. Try it out. See for yourself. If I act like this and this, trusting this, what happens? And have suffering be the judge. And that seems like as good a way as any to do it. And and I'm probably misunderstanding the sutta, and I hope that Soryu returns next week and is able to tell me why. But to me, that almost sounds like the way I operate anyways, just by normal conditioning. That, well, some things feel good, and I tend to do those, and some things feel bad, and I tend not to do those. And like that's kind of what I'm doing anyways, and I know it's not really working that well. And just in general, the judgment of, well, did this bring suffering or not, or was this a good thing or not, that's not always so easy to make, and it's still always me making it. There's still always this like sense of I'm responsible for that first jump, that first step. And I can't get around this. I think that's just the way it is. I think we're responsible for our action. It's just us. It's us and our judgment. And like that's a huge bummer for me, because like it would have been so awesome to really be able to rely on something external and say like, oh, it's just totally that. I'm totally going for that. And I don't see a way of that being possible. And from this perspective, when we look at gurus, the guru then becomes more of a tool than a savior. He's not going to be the one to answer this question of responsibility, but rather he's going to be a tool that we can responsibly wield, that we can use. But it is not someone who is going to do it for us. And it is not someone upon maybe whom we should rely too much or become fixated on as the end itself. But always keep in mind that it is the means to an end. There's the Zen metaphor of a teacher using his hand and a finger to point to the moon, with the moon here symbolizing the perhaps enlightenment or enlightened knowledge or direct experience of enlightenment, and the hand, of course, just being the pointer. But it is so easy for so many of us to remain looking at the finger and not at the moon that the finger is pointing to. And just to go back a little bit to when I was talking about the various things that we can believe in, and then to tie it into what we're doing here, this being a group that does focus on contemplative practice, and we will be doing a short meditation later. What's maybe different about contemplative practice and mysticism in general about these series of stepping stones that we can choose to take that differentiate them from others is that we are led stepping stone by our experience. And the promise of mysticism is that our own experience, our own inner experience, is what will eventually lead us to whatever your goal is, however you're framing whatever it is at the end of that trail of stepping stones, be it God or the absolute or source, or however it is you're phrasing the object of your spiritual longing. And the idea is that as you delve deeper and deeper into your individual experience, then you will, and again, this isn't something that I can speak of from my experience, but we hear it over and over from various teachers and various contemplative traditions, that your experience, your continually deepening, changing experience will be what guides you closer and closer to this center, or this God, which is, of course, not available in the non-mystic, non-contemplative theistic religions, or in nihilism, say, like that you could conceivably meditate yourself to a deeper understanding of that meditative tradition. I don't think you can nihilism hard enough to then prove to yourself in a certain way that nihilism is somehow correct. It doesn't have that process of experiential drawing you in, of leading you that way.
All paths lead to the same place except nihilism.
Oh man.
Who knows?
I haven't taken any, so who knows? I can't answer that. And now just maybe to further question what we're doing here, if we've been asking this question of what to trust, just to spin this around a little bit more, can we even trust what we've been questioning this whole evening? Like this question that I've been asking, what can we trust? What can we trust? Is that a trustworthy question? I think one of the interesting things that can be learned, that is maybe something that we realize at some point in life, is that not every question is valid or legitimate. And I can imagine a man who is trying very, very hard to answer the question, but why is the sky red? You know, and at noon, this isn't like a dusk or dawn thing, but why? Why is the sky red? And really delving deep into this question and suffering in this question, trying to answer this question. But you can see that it's maybe not a legitimate question. It can be put into words, right? It seems logical, the structure is logical, the grammar makes sense. But something is not legitimate in the question. And he could even be asking the question, what do I need to turn it back to green from red, to return it to its original state of green? And then it's not only a question for question's sake, but he actually has the sense that he needs to do something, that something is wrong, that he needs to fix, and it's important that he understands how. And there's a suffering for him in this question. There's an urgency. How do I turn the sky back to green? And he could conceivably spend a very long portion of his life trying to answer this question and suffering because he thinks that as long as he is not answering this question, then he is not doing what he is supposed to be doing in this life. And I ask you, what if this question we've been asking this whole night is a similar question? Is not valid in the same sense? How would we know it from inside that question? Could we? Would we? What assumptions are we making when we're asking this question? That there is such a thing as trust, that there is something trustworthy, that this concept that we have made in our head of something that is trustworthy represents something that it matches up to something in the quote-unquote real world. But is that true? Is that a thing? And this is the sense of urgency that I'd like to get across. I don't have any answers. I only have what I came here tonight to share was the sense of urgency of well, what is going on, and how do we grasp this thing called our life? From what angle do we view it, and how? Because however we do that, that's going to dictate our actions. And when I was talking to a few people about how to do this talk, and a few of them said, well, what's your thesis? And I said basically like, well, I don't really have a thesis. I just have some questions. And they're like, well, that's no good. Like, you need a thesis. You need to come with something. And I kind of just went like this. But when I was printing this page out, I realized that the thesis ties in to a Buddhist concept called samvega, which is a term in Pali, in the language similar to Sanskrit that the Buddha spoke. And samvega, a teacher called Thanissaru Bhikkhu defines it as the oppressive sense of shock, dismay, and alienation that come with realizing the futility and meaninglessness of life as it's normally lived, a chastening sense of our own complacency and foolishness in having let ourselves live so blindly, and an anxious sense of urgency in trying to find a way out of the meaningless cycle. This is Samvega. And in Buddhist contemplative practice, this is a good thing. This is a necessary sense that we must cultivate, that we must delve into. This sense of the deep inadequacy of the human condition as we have been given it, as we have lived it up to this point. That can be harnessed and then used, and using these contemplative techniques and using the wisdom traditions that have been passed down, should we choose to take that first step from void onto one of those paths, then those paths will eventually lead to whatever, to whatever, who knows, I don't know. And again, what's nice here is that trail of breadcrumbs of experiential feedback that the contemplative traditions offer. That slowly, as you go, as you take each step, and maybe your experience builds confidence and builds trust, and as you go forward, your trust and motivation is built up as well. That's the hope. And I'll just end with two quotes, not necessarily because they fit in real smoothly with this narrative that I've been building so far, mostly because I really like these quotes and it'd be fun to share them. The first one is by a Tibetan teacher called Chogyam Trungpa. And this maybe goes back to the void that I was describing earlier. And it seems he agrees to a certain extent about the nature of this void, and it's a short quote. He says, "The bad news is you're falling through the air, nothing to hang on to, no parachute. The good news is there's no ground." And to me, this is maybe pointing to what we were questioning before, the validity of our question, the validity of our need to say, I need ground to stand on. This is something that exists and that I can find if I only look long and hard enough for it. And maybe that's not true, and maybe it's fine. Maybe this void isn't a bad thing, and maybe a lot of our suffering is built from this crushing desire, yes, to find ground. I'm not saying that it's so. I'm just floating it as food for thought, and maybe for the discussion we'll have after this. And the second quote is by one of my favorite gurus, and he's from the Advaita Vedanta tradition from India. His name is Nisargadatta Maharaj. "Without trust, there is no peace. You always trust somebody or other. It may be your mother or your wife. Of all the people, the knower of the self, the liberated man, is the most trustworthy." So here he's talking about a guru, someone who has experienced more than you. "But merely to trust is not enough. You must also desire. Without desire for freedom, of what use is the confidence that you can acquire freedom? Desire and confidence must go together. The stronger your desire, the easier comes the help. The greatest guru is helpless as long as the disciple is not eager to learn." I'll skip a little bit. "The greatest guru is your inner self. Truly, he is the supreme teacher. He alone can take you to your goal, and he alone meets you at the end of the road. Confide in him, and you need no outer guru. But again, you must have the strong desire to find him, and do nothing that will create obstacles and delays. And do not waste energy and time on regrets. That's not something that I can necessarily understand, but it's something that I enjoy tasting. I like the taste of it. And if I can end with hope for something, it's maybe that accessing this samvega, this burning sense of urgency and inadequacy, will help lead us to questions that will enable us to practice and live in such a way that reduces our suffering and the sufferings of those around us.